Hi everyone, it's Ren here in my current woodcutter incarnations. Apologies for this rather disheveled look. But today I would like to have another little conversation about INFJs. It seems that my last video resonated with a lot of people. So I'm going to continue in that trend, continuing to take a break from not philosophy as a whole, but at least the presentation of philosophical themes on my channel. And instead I will discuss the potential risk for unhealthiness when you are an INFJ and how they can manifest itself. And I think that once you have identified the problem, well, first of all, you might, through that process, realize that you're not a type that you thought you were, but actually an unhealthy INFJ. There's no judgment of value in that kind of term. It's just, state of affairs. And it might also provide pathways towards working on that. So, there's many ways in which you could describe unhealthiness for any person, insofar as they are of a certain type, if we keep our focus on the discussion of type. So, you hear a lot of the time, you hear about the, in a sense, the NITI loop, which I think other people on YouTube have covered quite well. This idea that you would be locked in the sort of NI and TI sort of modes in a kind of feedback loop with one another. Maybe I'll cover that at a later point, even in this video, but I'm not going to start with that specifically. And there's also this concept of being in the grip, so of having your different functions reversed. So I'm aware of these ways of being unhealthy for an INFJ or any other type, but I would like to talk about other, maybe more straightforward ways of being unhealthy, so that people who are not too familiar with the technicalities of function use can understand what I'm saying. 1 second, try to make things a little brighter. But I don't want to brighten my face too much either, because I find that's annoying. Well, hopefully this is a good compromise. So, you know that an INFJ uses 4 functions. That's kind of the template, right? Introverted intuition, extroverted feeling, introverted thinking as a tertiary, and extroverted sensing. I think that ways for an INFJ to be unhealthy that I'm at least familiar with are when an INFJ is not using the functions in an optimal order, which is in that order, and specifically, not relying enough on the dominant function, which means that if you like the dominant function, introverted intuition, it's not just the function that we use the most or the function that we're most comfortable using. I mean, that's true, but introverted intuition is more than that. Introverted intuition, NI, is really the mode in which we operate. It's the way in which we are, in a certain sense. It's the lens through which we see the world. And what follows from that is that if we deviate from that lens to choose another lens as our primary way of relating to the world, this will not be quite natural for us. It will not be the optimal way for us to interact with the world, which means that whether we realize it or not, we will make an extra effort to adapt to that mode, which is not the number one mode, but another mode. So of course, perhaps an INFJ could try to operate, especially if they fancy themselves as INTJs or think they are INTJs, they might try to use T as their dominant or even their auxiliary function, and that's not going to work. I think that Are not very good users of extroverted thinking, so in rare cases will they even really try. However, because a lot of INFJs, and especially if they're healthy, which is why there is always a very close connection, an intimate connection between healthy and unhealthy in INFJs and other types, is that, well, we're very good at using extroverted feeling if we're healthy INFJs, because that's our auxiliary function. And we are, especially if we are a little bit older, in our 20s, late 20s, 30s, we're usually pretty good at proficient at using introverted thinking, TI, and in such a way that we realize that actually we're pretty good at being kind of like rational thinkers who categorize things into types, and indeed Jung himself was INFJ, so that proves the point. But it is not because we're good at using extroverted feeling and good at using introverted thinking. I'm just leaving SC aside for now, again, the inferior function. But it's not because we're good at it that we should behave as if either FE or TI were our dominants. And if we do that, which is possible if we are very proficient in one of those, we might unconsciously or consciously assume that should be our dominant way of proceeding. We might start behaving as if we were just overusing, if you like, FE or TI. And that is, I think, potentially a source of trouble. An INFJ who's great at TI, it's a very smart INFJ, like the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, but many other INFJs who are great at using TI, should always keep in mind that does not mean that they should always be operating with TI. It means that however good they are at using introverted thinking, let them use it when they need to use it, when it feels natural to use it. Let them not fall into the trap of TI overuse. And that's actually one thing that I used to be guilty of, and I think that's oftentimes I still have to struggle with that temptation, because I write a lot of philosophy and I'm I would be on the rational spectrum, like a more rational spectrum of the INFJ, type, although I'm a creative type as well, but usually through a kind of logical lens, let's say. And I'd often fall back into TI dominance or TI overuse whenever I would get kind of frustrated by my environment, because I would know that a TI is a function that at least I would think that I use it well, and people tell me that I'm good at being logical by default. But I find myself to be massively stressed out after a while, and I had physiological symptoms of that. Anxiety, very profound anxiety, couldn't sleep, was more hypochondriac than ever. So there were physiological repercussions to this TI overuse, because I was behaving as if, in a way, almost as if I were an INTP. But I'm not an INTP, and it's not because I'm good at using TI that I should always be in the mode of TI. And equally speaking, an INFJ who, and there are many of them who are better than me, for instance, at using FE, which after all is a more sort of even more optimal function for them than introverted thinking, well, should not be using FE as a dominant. You never use FE as a dominant if you're an INFJ, but you can behave as if you're trying to force FE into the dominant spot of your hierarchy of function use, and that's something that you should not do, because it's going to be unnatural. You're going to have to produce extra effort for it. You might think there are advantageous returns at first, but there are short-term returns. So for instance, I think that the sign that you're unhealthily overusing FE when you're an INFJ is when you're really trying to be extremely accommodating with everyone. You're trying to please everyone, and you're in that mode when you feel like your sense of self-esteem depends on pleasing. I think that's something that ISFJs can have as well. I've discussed with ISFJs before, and they've told me that they can experience that. The sense that when you're being giving and when you're helping other people, You can derive a sense of worth from that because you feel like you're being useful. The problem is that if you do that too much, or if you're always operating with that perspective, you become dependent on that vision, but also you're not being true to your own type. And that's going to stress you out, and that's not going to be helpful either. You're going to be in an unhealthy mode also. You're not supposed to be using either FE or TI as your dominance, even when you're very good at FE, even when you're very good at TI. You can be good at both without sort of consciously or unconsciously assuming that this should be your main mode of operation, because the main mode of operation is NI. And NI is literally, this is how I think about it, because sometimes I have to remind myself, no, I'm like overusing FE right now, or I'm overusing TI right now. And I'm not feeling good. And because INFJs are not always the best at knowing how they feel, contrary to some cliches, they're better at knowing how other people feel than how they themselves feel. Which is also true of ENFJs. Well, it's not easy sometimes to know whether you're overusing a function, so to speak, or placing it too high in the hierarchy for too long. Because it's hard to know what feels natural sometimes for an INFJ. Well, I always try to think about it like this: to let oneself be guided by one's intuition. And intuition, introverted intuition, I think, is a fluid world where you feel most at home. So it's not an introverted feeling like the world of emotion of an INFP or an ISFP. It's not introverted thinking. The what I described earlier as the logical, internal logical frameworks of an INTP. The mode of introverted intuition is this kind of, I'm sure that all INFJs would relate to that. It's an extremely difficult function to describe, but the feeling is often one of like things, perceiving the world as if we are floating in it, and we're sort of, things come to us and we synthesize them and we try to make sense of them. A lot of the time it happens without us realizing. We make sense of things without quite realizing we do, which is at the source of this idea that like we have aha moments and we can predict the future. But really what's happening is, instead of having to consciously use our logic to make sense of things, introverted intuition just brings them into sense almost like by itself. We're doing the work unconsciously at the back of our consciousness. But really, it's this feeling that you sort of know, right? You sort of know what you're going to do. Because it's not a feeling thing as such, it's not a thinking thing as such, it's an intuition thing. If you take a moment to think inside your own mind, you know what you really are going to do now, what you want to do now. You know what would make you feel like the most at ease, relaxed, at peace. Like this, a kind of being in a kind of ocean, like sort of swimming in an ocean and being comfortable and letting yourself be sort of brought along by the waves in the most natural fashion. If you take the ocean and its waves as NI, this is kind of the feeling. So in a way, it's almost like trying to get out of the TI overuse mode or FE overuse mode and going back into the NI overuse mode, which to me, as I experience it, often presents the advantage of being so default for me that I almost don't have to do anything, just have to sort of be. Stop trying to be anything else. And this is when I fall into NI, and it tends to, fall back into my dominant mode. And magically enough, it sort of lets me then orient myself towards FE or TI. And this is really the modes in which I am the most tranquil, at peace, least anxious, I would say, but also more productive. You might be more productive in the short term if you overuse FE or TI. But if you want a sustainable period of productivity, you need tranquility and you need to sort of have your bearings, And this can only be done via a healthy reliance on your dominant function, which is NI. So this was my perspective, and I would love to hear what you guys think in the comments. See you guys. I hope you enjoyed it.